If you have clicked in this video, it's probable that you don't know what is an MVP or minimum viable product. First of all, when we are talking about startups, an MVP is not this. Hi everyone, I'm Alex Recouso, and in this video I'm gonna show you what it is and how to create an MVP or minimum viable product. Basically, an MVP is the first thing that you can give to the users that you want to target. A minimum viable product, as its name says, it's a very simple product but that can add value to the customers. As you will see during the video, the goal of an MVP is to answer the question, does it solve the problem for the user? But even before building an MVP, the first thing that you should do is talking to the users. And you don't want to spend some months or even some years doing research. However, you want to talk to the users that have the problem in order to understand them better. In this sense, the perfect situation is when you are your own user, meaning you have the problem you want to solve. This is the case of many famous entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. For example, the founders of Airbnb were solving the problem that they had. In the beginning, they were just renting out their apartment in order to get some extra money, but later they realized there were more people that had the same problem. Also, another consideration that you should take into account is not asking users for functionalities. When you are getting feedback from your users, you should be getting information about the problem that they have. But in the end, it is your job to come up with functionalities that solve the problem. As Henry Ford said, if he would have asked people what they needed, they would have said they needed faster horses. So as I said before, in order to know if you can really solve the problem that you strive to solve, you have to build and launch something quickly. And don't worry if it is bad, because it only has to be good enough to get you some initial users. Even if you don't even have the vision of how to get to millions of users, it is important that you get these initial users that see value in your solution and you can get feedback from them. That's why you want to balance your vision and the feedback you get from the users. Since in a study of more than 100 failed startups, it was found that the number one cause of the failure was simply no market need. Nearly half of these startups spent months building something before even noticing that they were wrong in their central assumption, that someone was interested in their product in the first place. So after launching some initial version of your product, acquiring the first users and getting feedback from those users, the next thing you should do is iterate. And here you should be very careful because iterating is not the same as pivoting. You don't want to find another problem that your solution may solve. What you really want to do is to find a solution for the problem that you are striving to solve. Fix the fucking solution, not the problem. Yeah, this is why an MVP or minimum viable product is a process. When doing an MVP, you will not build something and that's it. No, what you're going to do is to enter in a trial and error phase until you find the solution that solves the problem. Some people have illustrated this under the concept fail fast, because in a trial and error world, the one who fails fast ends up faster at the solution. Also, when planning an MVP, you should take into account that it should take you weeks, not months to build. You should build a minimum viable product that solves a very specific problem for a very small subset of users. You have to limit the functionalities of the MVP to only what is needed by the users to solve the problem. And it is very important not only to know what functionalities you are going to include in the MVP, but also to time box these specs. Once you know what you want to include in your MVP and how long is it going to take you to build it, let's say 6 weeks, you should write this spec. Because once you start talking with the users or even with the investors, you are going to be tempted to add functionalities. But it is very important that you stick to what you have planned to build and you ship it. And also, as important as shipping something, it is to not falling in love with this first version of your product. The same way you don't fall in love with someone you have just met, you should not fall in love with the first version of your product. because you should be able to change your mind and iterate this version. As I said, an MVP is not something that you build once and you consider the job done. It is an ongoing process. That's why you should repeat over and over the process of identifying your riskiest assumption, finding the smallest possible experiment to test that assumption, and using the results to reassess. As an example, I'm gonna show you the MVP of Airbnb. This version didn't even have a payment gateway nor a map, even though it was the simplest version of Airbnb that could solve the problems the users had. Another famous MVP is the first version of Twitch that was called Justin TV. Indeed, it was called this way because it was just Justin Kang, one of the co-founders of Twitch, streaming his own live. In this first version of Twitch, there was only one channel, it was Justin streaming his live, and no other person could do streamings. It was only later when they realized the potential of the platform and the technology, and they decided to open Twitch to everybody. That's when people started streaming video games and Twitch became the giant it's today. And the third MVP that I brought you today is the one from Stripe. The platform didn't have any partnerships with banks and the functionalities were so limited. Indeed, this MVP was so simple that it was the founders of Stripe, the Collison brothers themselves, who were going to the offices of the companies to integrate Stripe. This is the perfect example of an MVP, the minimum product that is solving the problems that the users have. The only case in which you want to build a heavy MVP is if you are in an industry with lots of regulations such as insurance or banking, or if you are doing something like biotech or hard tech or building rockets. Even though we can argue that the first versions of the rockets of SpaceX were MVPs themselves. So if I want you to go away with something from this video, is that it is much easier to learn from your users when you have an MVP, and launching simply means start getting users. In the words of Peter Drucker, there is surely nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency something that should not be done at all.
Watch me do my thing, get lost into my singing, hot like New Orleans.